From the Virginia Audio Collective at WTJU 91.1 FM and Brown College at the University of Virginia, this is Circle of Willis, human stories of the science that shapes our world.
As a developmental psychologist, you have to acquire a lot of different skills. One of them being intentionally clumsy in front of a toddler. Kids are maybe quite smart in their helping, that they're making the right inferences in these situations and know how to help.
Welcome back to Circle of Willis. I'm your host, Jim Cohn.
And I'm the producer, Sage Tangway. Today we are watching videos of babies.
Do you know what these videos are?
Well, they are adorable, but clearly there's more going on here, so tell us a little bit about them.
So these are the recordings of a series of experiments by today's guest, Felix Warneken. And basically in each one he's doing this simple task in front of a toddler, except he does it really terribly. He's a total doofus. He keeps dropping blocks. He's losing spoons. He's reaching for objects just out of his grasp. And these kids, these very young kids, seem to know exactly what to do.
Yeah, they sort of stare at him for a moment and then very matter-of-factly toddle over and help him out. It's very cute.
It is very cute. And while it also seems simple and kind of natural, the ideas and purposes behind Warneken's work here are a bit more hefty.
The motivating question is to understand, like, what are the origins of our social behavior, and that obviously we engage in a lot of selfish behavior. And
Sure.
The assumption often is that that's basically all we do. So even if we are cooperating, it's just something on the surface, and
Right.
deep down, it's all selfishly motivated.
Okay, so we're really talking about altruism here.
Exactly. We'll start by hearing a little bit about Felix's educational background and then move into his studies, which are as fascinating as they are precious.
You're from Germany. Where were you? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Tübingen and Berlin. So
Okay.
Tübingen, a small
Cool towns.
university town.
Yeah,
and
Tübingen is tiny.
Yeah,
Berlin, not so
80,000.
much.
And like if the students aren't there, it's fairly dead. It's like
Really?
yeah.
A little bit like Charlottesville here.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, I
similar
see.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
What'd you do? What did your parents do? What's your story? I want to get your story.
Oh,
over
my
there.
story. My God.
Yeah, right? Yeah, I'm going for everything.
So my parents, they're now retired, but my mother was actually a professor in Berlin at a design school, and my father an anthropologist in Tübingen.
You said you're a psychologist, but that's pretty. The stuff you do reminds me a lot of evolutionary anthropology.
Yeah, so it's true. I mean, so my mother actually was also is more of an anthropology kind, but they're not evolutionary anthropologists. So basically what they've been interested in their work was to look at like everyday behaviors and what they signal about culture. When you think about studying human cultures, there's a lot about statues and contracts and the emperors and kings and so forth, right? But what they've been doing is more look at how is cultures embedded in like everyday activities and everyday objects. So what does it tell you about how, and this is what my mother's been doing, how people furnish their apartments. So that everybody thinks like, oh, this is my individual style.
Yeah.
But then when you look at it,
not so individual.
Not so individual. Like, I mean, obviously individual with a certain frame, but like the people she visited to look at their homes that were like designers and architects in the 90s, they just had like no curtains. And so this is in Germany. Like no curtains, white walls, like wooden floors.
Very
minimalist, completely minimalist, and like nothing. Yeah, so just completely minimalist, steel, wood, white. That's what they do. And then when you look at other people, like maybe more from a working class background, they would want to create a warm home with like nice sofas, and the TV set is centrally located in the middle of the living room, and these kinds of things, or maybe have tapestry walls with pictures and so forth. So, but that is kind of coherent within each kind of subculture or whatever. So I think what maybe motivated me for my own work, looking at what my parents have been doing, is that you see a lot in apparently mundane things. Like a kid picking up a clothespin, you think like, so what? But when you understand a little bit more about the implications of this, maybe you can see that. So I'm trying to always look for the things, the little things, but that carry a lot of meaning, rather than maybe thinking about like just only what's really completely visible to you as big is actually meaningful.
I talked to Judy Deloach about some of her work as well, and she was describing just seeing her kid trying to sit on a little toy sofa.
Oh, all right.
Right?
So this,
and it was, she's like, what the hell is he doing that for?
Oh, right. Yeah, that is amazing.
Just, sort of taking seriously what you see in the world, very mundane things.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Revelatory. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, now I'm a professor, so I don't get to test the kids, right? This is my grad students
you don't
doing
get
that.
to do anything anymore.
I didn't get to do anything, right? It's just like see the numbers and try to write papers.
I feel you.
But this is the thing, that you just be vigilant and see these things. And so it's kind of sad in some sense that the helping study, I started piloting a study with the kids. I was playing with the kid and then seeing certain things too. So that Judy discovered it by looking at kids.
Just see stuff happening and you take it seriously and you start investigating it. And that's one of the things. I mean, I even used to do clinical work. So I used to see people in therapy, work with war veterans and things. And I miss that engagement too, because a lot of my work, my scientific work, grew from things that popped into my head from how people behaved.
I see.
Just as so
be there on the ground, embedded,
to be in there. Right. You kind of when you get into doing the more sort of professorial stuff, it's harder to be at that level. Ground level.
Right.
Yeah. So where'd you go to undergraduate school?
So I was at the Free University in Berlin.
Okay.
So that's where I went
were there
first.
Sort of close to family and things like that?
So the Free University was actually built with the help of the American General Consulate in Germany, so in West Berlin. So the history is that in Berlin there was the Humboldt University. So that was the traditional university. But that was in the east, so the Russian sector after World War II.
Right.
But then several of the students moved out in protest because of the ideological components of that university and went into the American sector, where the Free University, that's why it's called Free University, was founded in a movie theater.
Are you?
Yes.
Stop it now.
And
really?
Yeah. So the Americans helped with it, and then it ended up in this area in the west, southwest of Berlin. Where you wouldn't really put a university usually because it's
you
a
put
very
a movie theater there.
Yeah, movie theater. It's a very posh area. The lots of villas and all of this. So several of the institutes are still in these villas. In any case, so it had strong ties to U.S. always. So there was this exchange program with several universities in the U.S. And so I was successful getting one of these stipends.
Excellent.
So I spent a year at Vanderbilt University working with people there. And that was really cool because in Germany, we just learned a lot through like textbook and reading about stuff. We didn't get to do a lot.
You didn't get to like do research experiments and stuff as an undergraduate?
That's right, exactly. So the assumption was basically that for 4 years you are learning how to do it and then you start doing it.
I see.
I mean, that's not true for every single professor, but that's kind of that's how it was mostly. Then going to Vanderbilt, I realized that I was supposed to design an experiment in each seminar. That was like the final.
I got started doing extra credit assignments. I did my first publication grew out of an extra credrit assignment in an undergraduate class.
I see.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So I really love that to try out ideas and get cooking right away.
Yeah.
Even if it's like in the end it just doesn't work out. It's not the point. It's not. It's just being going through the exercise. That's
getting accustomed to thinking that way.
Yeah.
And doing that stuff.
Right.
Yeah. You went right into grad school?
Yeah, I went right into grad school. I mean, the system in Germany works differently. You start your PhD. All you do is your dissertation.
And you did that at Max Planck?
That's right. I applied for grad school in the U.S., but then I got the offer from Mike Tomasello to be his PhD student I mean, it's very different from a university because it's a pure research institution. The Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, where I was, what's so exciting about it is that you can do this work with children, but also with apes. So there is a collaboration with the zoo in Leipzig where all 4 great ape species, so chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and orangutans are available.
Wow,
so they're just
that's amazing.
Like for the visitor. So it's just a regular zoo, but then it's designed in a way that researchers from the Max Planck Institute can run these studies. And yeah, that was awesome. So I did that for 3 years.
The rest is frickin' history, man. You took off like a rocket.
Thanks. Yeah.
I mean, it's been really tremendous.
Yeah.
Now let's hear a little bit about that history, which means we get to talk about the babies again, as well as some chimps.
Part of the reason I wanted to talk to you so badly is that I've been just an incredible fan of your research going back at least until, gosh, when was the Warneken et al. Paper where you got those
2006?
Great, 2006? Yeah, 2006 or 2004, something. It's 2006.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Love that paper.
Thanks.
Holy shit. I was sort of obsessed about that paper for a long time because of the obvious and age-old question about human nature as fundamentally cooperative versus fundamentally sort of selfish and competitive.
From a natural selection perspective, it is the case that everything has to contribute one way or the other through indirect
genetic inheritance.
That's right. So that is clearly the case. But for a psychologist, the question is more about what are the motivations behind that. We are not just consciously all the time thinking about some selfish benefit we gain from our actions. I'm a developmental and comparative psychologist, so I think that by studying children and comparing the behaviors of humans, especially children, with that of our closest evolutionary relatives, such as chimpanzees, we can gain insight into the origins of human behaviors. To study young kids where you need nonverbal tasks, and also study chimps where obviously you need nonverbal tasks. What that means is basically you need to design an experiment that's really simple to understand, that it's just intuitive. And with chimps, there are not a lot of subjects you can test. So what you have to do is to really extract it, to just say, I need one comparison, like experimental condition versus control. There's no way of doing like a multivariate design or control for all kinds of things. So it kind of helps to think about kids' studies when you know that you have to do the equivalent thing with chimps.
Yeah.
Because then
how are you going to do it?
Yeah, right. So you, from the beginning, have to figure out a way to make it really intuitive and simple because you know that you want to do that with chimps as well. Helping behaviors seem a really good case study in some sense to get at what are the motivations behind our apparently altruistic acts and what are also the cognitive abilities do you need to have to engage in them. A lot of the literature in psychology, behavioral economics, and other areas assumes that we are basically only selfishly motivated as humans. And then over development, we, for example, acquire norms about being good citizens or following social norms and so forth.
We have to guide our children to the point of being pro-social and cooperative.
Exactly. I mean, there's no question about the fact that we are being socialized into being cooperative in certain circumstances. So these factors...
I was going to say, I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they're little beasts.
Right. But they may be, and that's kind of the question we asked, that at least under some circumstances,
they're
they may be altruistic as well.
Yeah, I'm sure they are, yeah.
When you're
I'm
sure
not
that there.
All right, I'm sure their teachers or somebody else sees it.
I see. That's right, yeah. You try to create a situation where you rule out certain factors that may influence that. Like, do they do it because they want to impress the teacher, or they do it want to impress the parent? And so with our experimental studies, they're experimental because what we create is a situation where we try to control for all these other factors that we kind of have the parent be out of the room, or obviously there are no teachers around and so forth. So what does the kid do when they have no other
motivation or secondary gain or something like that?
That's right. So that's kind of how we implement these experiments to create different kinds of situations in which a person, the experimenter, has a problem. So the experimenter is hanging towels on the clothesline and then drops it accidentally on the floor.
Right.
Or the person wants to write a letter and then the pen drops on the ground and he can't get it back.
Yeah.
Or the person wants to put a stack of magazines into a cabinet, but the doors are closed and he's helplessly bumping into the doors and can't get it open.
Is that you? By the way, you can see those videos online. Is that you in the videos?
That is me as a grad student. Yeah, I had to be a good actor to do that.
Oh.
Yes, right. Yeah. So exactly. So as a developmental psychologist, you have to acquire a lot of different skills. One of them being intentionally clumsy in front of a toddler. So these are those kind of situations we created, and then we wanted to see when an 18-month-old, this was a first study, is observing these failed attempts to retrieve an object or put stuff away, will they be spontaneously helpful? And then we found that kids will help across a variety of situations. So they're helpful with objects
spontaneously,
exactly. So we had it where there's the parent is sitting in the room in this initial experiment, but the parent's supposed to be silent, not say anything, and the experimenter is also not directly asking the kid for help. It's just indicating the problem, like reaching for an object or bumping into doors.
Right.
Usually, if they help at all, they do so within just a few seconds. So it's not that they're waiting for some kind of communicative cue about the problem. So they seem to be really spontaneously helpful in these situations, even novel situations.
Yeah.
So one potential reason why kids may help with an object that fell down and person can't get it back is that they have been in that situation before and people have helped them, or they have been rewarded or told what to do in these kinds of situations. And so they bring that knowledge into the lab, and that's why they help in these ways. Yeah. But what we also did was we created a situation that's completely novel. So they could not have encountered that particular problem before.
What was the novel one?
So what we did is we built a box that had a hole on top and a flap on the side. And another experimenter first showed them the kid this box. And so they showed that you can use the flap if you want to retrieve something from it. And so kids demonstrate that they can do that. So they did do it once. And then later during our study, I come into the room and I stir my coffee that I placed on top of that box. And then my spoon falls through the hole. And ignorant and clumsy as I am, I try to squeeze my hand through that tiny hole and can't get my spoon back. And what we found is that in this case, the kids open the flap and retrieve the spoon.
Yeah.
So it indicates that they use a skill they've just learned already in helpful ways. So this is a situation that could not have been reinforced at home by the parent or someone. So we know the history, basically, of that particular behavior, and they already use it for helpful purposes. Kids are maybe quite smart in their helping, that they're making the right inferences in these situations and know how to help.
I guess really the question that comes up for me is, why aren't the chimps doing it? What is the missing piece? Is it information? Is it motivation?
So with chimps, it is the case that they do it under some circumstances.
What circumstances do chimps help? Spontaneously?
Spontaneously too. So what we did, the idea is that we tried to look at chimps in comparison to learn something about basically the biological foundation of this, or evolutionary one. Is this something that's unique to our species?
That's the comparative part.
Exactly. Aside from the question whether it's human unique or it's also found in other animals, is that it can also tell us about the origin of this behavior in humans. Because if it is the case that, say, learning some moral code or being rewarded by parents for appropriate behavior and so forth is necessary for these behaviors to emerge, then we would not expect that to exist in chimpanzees, right? Because they're not, mothers are not rewarding their offspring for appropriate behavior, and they cannot verbally express any moral code if they even have one, right?
Yeah.
So with that, we can address to what extent that is really a necessary prerequisite. So when we tested chimps, we originally did not expect that they would be helpful at all. But what we found was in an initial study that when, in this case, a keeper who was basically their surrogate mother was dropping stuff on the ground and couldn't get it back, 3 chimps that we tested in this paradigm were willing to help her. So at least in situations where she was reaching for an object she couldn't get back, they would also be helpful. They wouldn't help in this novel box paradigm, and they wouldn't also help opening doors so that she could put stuff away. So their helping was not quite as flexible as we saw.
Was that because they couldn't understand what those other things were about? Or
Yeah, that is a possibility. So
Yeah.
this is, maybe it just doesn't make much sense for them that someone would
why
put
would
something
you wanna
away.
Exactly. What do you want to put something in that little thing for?
Right.
Doesn't make any sense.
That's right. If someone does not show a behavior, we don't know, is it due to some motivational difference? Is it due to some ability to understand the situation?
Yeah.
So from that study, it's not totally clear why they did it in one situation, not in another. When we tested 14-month-old infants, so even younger ones than from the original study, they would help in situations like the chimps, where it was with objects that were out of reach. But when it was about this novel box or opening a cabinet, also 14-month-old infants were not helpful. It seems plausible that it has something to do with more understanding of the situation.
Yeah.
Because it is more complex to read the goal of the other person who's reaching in through a hole into a box than overtly reaching for an object that's just visibly in front of you. And it's also easier to know how to help when you just have to hand something over than when you have to open a box for someone and so forth.
Right. I mean, you have to read the intention of the person.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not always clear to me in reading this sort of the literature on intention, what intention requires. You know, is it only that I know that you want a thing, or do I have to also understand what the thing is that you want?
Right,
it's
right.
a little bit of a, I think
that's right. Exactly.
Permeates the literature.
Yeah, that's true. So that's right. And I think that in these contexts where someone's just reaching for an object, all you need to know is what is the thing the other one wants, not like some complex connection of different means and ends relationships. So that's maybe a reason. So one possibility then is that also chimps are willing to help, but they're just maybe cognitively not quite as flexible in making the right inferences about around different kinds of situations. This was still the starting point for our projects, because obviously it leaves many questions unanswered.
This is when you were working with Michael Tomasello.
That's right. So this was all of this started when I was a graduate student of Mike Tomasello at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology.
What a great experience.
Yeah, no, that was great. Just one anecdote about how the whole thing started was that before I came to the institute, when I was applying, I was reading some work by Andrew Meltzoff on intention reading, famous work on imitation.
Yeah, right.
So basically the paradigms are that a child, an 18-month-old, so this is, and there's a reason why we test 18-month-old to begin with, sees someone, for example, trying to pull apart a dumbbell, but never succeeds. So what the kids see is someone holding this dumbbell and the fingers always slipping off one end. When the dumbbell is given to the kids do not repeat that behavior. They reproduce what the person was trying but failing to do. So they pull it apart.
Okay.
And so this is an indication that children are not just looking at what's observable, but they're making inferences about the intention the person had.
Right.
And so
they know what the person wants to do.
That's right.
Yeah. Makes all the difference.
What I was then thinking was that helping may actually be another way of testing their ability to read intentions.
Okay.
Because in order to help, you also have to be able to understand that what you see is not what the person wanted. So someone reaching for a dropped object is not doing some gymnastic exercise. The person wants to have the object back. Or bumping into the doors is not what the person wants. What the person wants is to actually put stuff away.
So there's real social cognition involved in this. It's a combination of knowing and being motivated to help.
That's right. Exactly.
Right.
I thought originally this was just another test of this social cognitive ability to read intentions. When I then started as a PhD student, I suggested this as a test for that. But then more senior people were saying, like, if you drop something in front of a kid, they just want to keep it. There's just no way they will give it back to you. I had never worked with chimps, and people working with chimps, like, there's just no way. They just want to hold on to objects.
So there was really no inkling among your senior colleagues and advisors that the kids would spontaneously help you in this way?
At least not in these kinds of situations. So they thought that maybe if it's about holding on to objects, they just wouldn't want to give it up. And so, but then when I was piloting for a different study, which was about like collaboration, so the different thing, that I played with a kid, and there was a table tennis ball that we bounced around, and then that ball rolled away when we were sitting on the floor. And then with this helping study in the back of my mind, I then pretended like I couldn't get it back and was stretching towards that table tennis ball. This toddler walked up and gave it to me. And so when I showed...
the light bulb came on.
Yeah, exactly. And when I showed that to Mike Tomazello, I said, okay, so maybe there's something to it. And that's how we then started to run this study, and we're more optimistic about the possibility that at least these kids would help. Mike Tomazello had started this theory about collaboration and shared intentions being the thing that differentiates humans from others. And then I come in with the data of the chimpanzees actually being helpful. And I remember him saying, my life would be easier if they hadn't done that. But yeah.
Yep. That's how that goes, isn't it?
Right. But this but this is the thing. I mean, Mike Tomazello is amazing because he's, in the end, is really about exploring. So
sure. So chimps do spontaneously help under certain circumstances. That's in the 2006 paper.
Yeah.
It's still qualitatively different, it seems, than what's going on in humans.
That's right.
He's not completely wrong.
No, not at all. No, that's right.
And especially the sort of shared intention as a social cognitive task also seems to have some unique human qualities to it.
Right, absolutely. In the end, it's more of a fine-tuning of that idea than throwing it out. First of all, the claim about shared intentionality is more about, you could say, jointness or together.
Right.
So that it's more like a notion of we are doing something together. Right. That still holds true when chimpanzees work together on a task. Say there's a board with food on it, but it's outside. And the only way to get it is to pull a rope that is threaded around the board. And then in some situations, the ends of the rope are so far away that only two chimps can do it together. Chimps are able to do that. There have been great demonstrations of that, like Satoshi Hirata from Japan and Alicia Melis, who was a grad student and postdoc in the Max Planck Institute as well. But then there's still the question about what are the chimps thinking?
Right.
And what seems to be the case is that chimps are maybe thinking about the other individual more as a social tool, as it's called.
As an instrumental resource.
That's right, exactly. So I understand, if we were chimps, I would understand I need you to solve that task, but I don't care about you in this particular case only as long as you're helpful, that I get my reward and you get your reward. And that by itself does not yet mean that we are thinking as a team, basically, where we're doing this together.
I also think about some of Peggy Clark's research at Yale in the 70s and 80s, and she made this distinction between social exchanges, relationships, and communal behaviors. And she started arguing, she's one of the first people I think really writing in this way, that it's intrinsically reinforcing for humans to engage in communal activity. That was the goal. That there was no other goal. Just joining together and forming relationships is sufficient reinforcement. And so sort of a lot of ideas spring forth from that. But one of the things that I wonder is if this applies to some of the work that you're doing, that it almost isn't even about helping behavior per se, but that helping behavior is one way to get to the goal, which is the joining.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that motivates a lot of the behaviors we see in several contexts, so that indeed kids often will choose to just do something together, even though the other one is not really necessary. So they could do it alone, but they choose to do it together. Like there's some studies by my colleague Maria Greffenhain who showed that kids will likely choose to rather like pass on a tool to the other ones so that they can do it together, even that they could just take over all by themselves. So they seem to, and
there's no obvious gain to doing it together, other than that you're doing it together. And that's sort of, it's interesting that we're only. It seems like there's a growing number of researchers that are waking up to this fact.
Yeah, that's right. But I think that still in the situations that we create in our helping studies is that we kind of rule it out by having the kids like do it like 10 times or 20 times. And each time they help, the other person is just continuing with her own task and is never really
so they're
acknowledging.
not being reinforced for it.
That's right. So if the kids really think that handing over a pen means that now we're drawing together or something, that is just not the outcome of it.
Yeah.
So if children really, that was their ulterior motive, I give you your pen so that we can do something together now, then they should stop.
Right.
But they don't. So they keep going, even if, for example, in one corner of the room, the kid is playing in a ball pool, so having fun doing that. And the person in the other end of the room is dropping something.
Yeah.
The kids crawl out of the ball pool, give the object that the person dropped, and then just head back to the ball pool to keep playing over there by themselves. So I think that in many situations, they're really motivated to want to do stuff together. But when someone is in need, then they're also willing to help, even if they don't get any kind of joint playtime out of that.
Do you ever have a look at what happens when you sort of block their ability to help, or when you make it harder for them to help? Do they give up, or do they get upset, or do they try to what happens there?
So there's actually really interesting work by Robert Heppach and Amrisha Vaish, showing that when kids are not able to help and the problem is not resolved, so someone is reaching for something and they just can't get to their goal, when you measure their change in pupil dilation, so this is like a very high-end setup to do that, the kids seem to stay kind of distressed when this is happening. They remain basically aroused about that situation.
Yeah.
However, if they are able to help, that arousal is reduced. If someone else is helping that poor fellow who wants to get his pen back or whatever they dropped, then they also are reduced in their arousal.
Wow.
So there are at least two things that can be gained from this. So one is that it's not necessary that the kid is doing the helping.
Wow.
So it's not that they
that's fascinating.
that they are thinking about
Holy
like,
shit.
I want to do it, like that the mastery is the thing that is motivating it primarily.
Yeah.
This may be part of it, but that it's ultimately really about the other person's goal. So I want you to succeed, and whether I help you with it or someone else helps you with it, that's kind of secondary. The main thing is,
That's amazing, because I was talking with you to form this picture in my mind that the helping is part of the joining, right? The joining together and creating a socially cohesive unit requires my engaging with you in this experience. But what you're saying is it doesn't even require that necessarily.
Not necessarily.
So
right.
then it really becomes about satisfying the other person's goal, which is truly helping.
Yeah.
Without any obvious personal gain, even at the level of creating a relationship that could be functional for other things later on.
Right.
Damn.
What's interesting is that the connection, what you're talking about between helping and doing stuff together, the way you phrased it was the connection of helping in order to do something together.
Right, yeah.
And that, I think in many cases is true, but
Yeah.
doesn't exhaust all the cases of helping. But the other way also from doing something together to helping exists. So there's some work by my former student, Katharina Hamann, where two kids, 2-year-olds or 3-year-olds, working together on a task. So they have to get rewards. And to do that, they have to move a long rod upward until this rod with rewards is over an opening, so that they can get their toys out.
Okay.
And then in certain situations, it's the case that the two kids work on it together, but the lucky child gets the reward halfway. And the unlucky child still needs the help from the collaborator. What we find in this study is that when they are working together, they are more likely to help each other out than when one is just individually working on their side of the task and the other one is working on the other side of the task.
So having some relationship, at least in the lab, now, sort of facilitates the effect.
Absolutely, right. When you think about collaboration, when we think of working as a team, it comes with certain obligations about how we should interact with each other that goes beyond what we would do if we just view ourselves as individuals.
Right.
Right. So if we're working on a task together, it means that we want to succeed. And we succeeding means that I succeed and you succeed.
Yeah.
And so my succeeding is only fulfilled by partly of you also succeeding. Certainly around 3 years of age, kids have this capacity to really think about a we.
Yeah.
And I mean, at least in a diet and like two people doing something together, and that it comes with certain obligations about how to treat each other, and maybe also not just thinking about what am I doing,
right,
but also what are you doing and how it relates together. So, for example, again, my colleague Maria Gräfenhain has some interesting studies where the kid with another person is putting together a scene of farm animals, so they basically have complementary roles in putting the stuff together, versus doing it kind of individually. The source memory of who did what is much worse when it's done collaboratively. So this indicates that, I mean, in one sense, invites an interesting question about like why are we wrong about it, right?
Right.
So it's just like being wrong about memory may be bad, but maybe it's actually something that's more efficient somehow when we do it together, that we're not thinking about primarily my doing and your doing, but really kind of a top-down view. What's getting done, exactly. Yeah. And that it's not so much about who came up with what idea or something like that. Yeah.
You know, we put people in the scanner in one of our studies. We put them under threat of shock. It's sort of like a Tanya Singer kind of study. We put people under threat of shock, and then we put their friends under threat of shock or a stranger under threat of shock. And what we found is that if you look at the activation in the brain, all throughout the brain, when their selves are being under threat, or when their friend is under threat, they're hardly distinguishable. They're responding towards the threat directed at the friend as if the threat is directed at the self.
Oh, wow. I see.
And not just in sort of prefrontal conceptual, but in like the insula, where they're encoding the state of their body. And when you look at strangers, the correlations just evaporate. There's just no strange. So we argued that there was this sort of neural manifestation that what you could see from the work of your colleague or the work of Art Aaron is sort of metaphorical, is actually literally true at the way that at the level of how the brain
right
self. It makes me start to wonder how this could have happened. What's the evolutionary story that leads to this sort of miraculous? But there must be some benefit to this breakdown between self and other, and this intrinsic motivation to join and help and cooperate.
I mean, what's really interesting is that when you look at humans in comparison to even our closest evolutionary relatives, like chimpanzees or other apes, is that we depend on cooperation so much more.
Yeah.
And that is true in modern society.
We don't have much else.
Yeah.
We just have
we have to cooperate. I mean, I assume you did not produce your own food, right? You probably got it in a grocery store, so did I. And so this is something where we have to really depend on others to do that. So this doesn't have to be like cooperative in a narrow sense, but that we really depend on each other as a group, because no one individual would be able to do all this by themselves. When you look at chimpanzees, they basically forage on their own. They're moving together as a group, but when it comes to like obtaining the food, it's not done in a collaborative way or some kind of. So in humans, mostly it is the case that, and that's true for like hunter-gatherers, so that are more reflective of our past, evolutionary past. There is some kind of division of labor,
non-redundant and cooperative.
And then food is obtained and brought back to the camp and then shared, whereas chimpanzees just eat on the go. They pick berries or ants or something, and they just eat it immediately. They're not bringing it back and have to share it.
Or a base that they bring the stuff back to.
Exactly. So for them, it's not necessary when it comes at least to foraging behavior that they have to trust that what they brought back is left there and nobody else is claiming ownership over it and these kinds of things. So they don't have to evolve these capacities for that. The thing that maybe comes closest to the kinds of behaviors of more collective foraging is hunting in chimpanzees. So chimpanzees hunt for basically red colobus monkeys. They're small monkeys that are up in the trees, and then a group of males typically would run after them and catch them, and then several individuals get some of the meat. And there have been really impressive observations of this, that, for example, it is beneficial for them to do it as a group. So it would not be possible for one individual to just go for the monkey and catch it.
Yeah.
But if several individuals are ganging up, basically they succeed. The question is, like, do they really view this as like a team effort, basically, the way that we described it earlier about there's some obligation about how we should interact, we should help each other out, and also we should maybe share the resources at the end. Most people have described the sharing of food afterwards more as tolerated theft. So that there is some sharing happening in the sense of
sort of like what you get with wolf packs eating a
maybe more like that. Exactly. So that typically one chimp would catch the monkey and can hold on to it, but then others approach as well and want to get some of the meat. And so then the one holding on to the carcass has to make a decision about whether to let others have some so that they basically are pleased and don't let go or whatever, or risk fighting over the carcass and maybe losing everything. It's not based upon some contract of like, okay, you get some, I get some. It's basically being harassed.
Right.
Leads up to an individual decision-making process. Should I just hold on to it and want to keep all of it, or should I just let some go? And when we run these kinds of studies with chimpanzees in an experimental context, we actually find that chimpanzees do not share stuff after they've spontaneously when they collaborate or something. So we're not doing anything with monkey meat, but we do it with like banana slices and so forth, or grapes, where we create situations where children or chimpanzees, so try to keep it as parallel as possible, are either individually or collaboratively working towards obtaining resources like toys in the case of kids, or grapes in the case of chimpanzees. And then we see what happens if one ends up with more than the other.
Got it.
What we find is that when 2 3-year-olds are working together for, say, 4 marbles, but one ends up with 3 and the other one only with 1, they're likely to equalize things.
How? Do they fight?
No, they don't. So this is
Are
interesting.
you kidding?
Yeah, they're not fighting. They
must not be siblings.
They're not siblings. That's right. So they're kids that know each other from daycare, but they're not genetically related.
So you take out the day-to-day relationship of potential issues, and you just have relatively stranger kids to each other.
Yeah, no, they're familiar.
They're familiar.
But they're not.
They're daycare.
They're daycare, and then they either work on this together, and one ends up with 3, the other one with 1. In that case, they often will like give the extra one to the other, or take only 2, so let the other one have the 1 to make it equal. If there is some kind of protest, it usually happens only by the one who has less in this collaborative context. If someone says, "Hey, I have less," then the other one views it as a good argument, basically, and lets the other one have that. And that's compared with the condition where the one kid worked on one side of the apparatus alone, and the other one on the other side of the apparatus alone, and one ends up with 3 and the other with 1. And in that case, they just accept the inequality.
Got it.
So holding the relationship constant, basically, right?
Yeah.
These are also kids from the daycare, and they know each other to the same extent as the kids who collaborated. But the difference is really in how these resources were obtained. When we run the same basic study with chimps, they are also successful at doing that. And they are also letting their partner have this extra resource.
Yeah.
But whether this was done after they worked on it individually or they worked on it collaboratively has no effect. So for chimps, at least, it doesn't seem to create a special status that we are collaborators to the extent to which how we share stuff with each other.
Interesting.
One thing that's really fascinating about the chimps is that for them, the social relationship matters a lot in these collaborative situations. So again, this is work by my colleague Alicia Willis, who put 2 chimps together that were tolerant with each other. So she measured that by basically, can they eat out of the same bowl? Does one displace the other? It's not characteristic of the individual, but on the dyadic level, right? Okay. So A is in a tolerant relationship with B, but is in an intolerant relationship with C. Then when you put A and B together, when they are pulling at this rope thing to get rewards, they are actually successful. If A is working with C, it wouldn't even happen at all. So when there is like an intolerant relationship that's often of like a more dominant male with a subordinate one, they wouldn't even engage in the task. The reasoning is that probably they see that there's just no point in collaborating because the dominant is just going to take everything. Exactly.
So I'm just not even going to start.
I'm not going to start.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes it's also the case, I think that, Alicia was saying that the dominant chimps are so dumb, they just want to monopolize the apparatus. Like they rather would just want to take the rope than to have the other one touch the other end. So this is something where maybe the dominance is just so much more important than obtaining the food, or everything is viewed as just another way of showing dominance, that the calorie benefit from this is just secondary and it's not going to happen. And that's also important for an evolutionary story about it, that maybe these capacities are there to some extent, but they're still fragile because they appear only in certain types of situations. That's true.
The capacities meaning cooperation or
So like in this case, to what extent are chimpanzees able to collaborate on a task where two have to work together? For some mutualistic benefit, or also the helping task where they do it in certain contexts but not in others. If you look at like the basic capacity and remove several interfering factors, then you can see that it's kind of there. What that means is you no longer have to ask about the transition from chimps to humans, like where did it come from? Because it kind of was there.
It was already there. Sort of proto.
That's right.
Type was already available.
Exactly.
For evolution to act upon, natural selection to act upon.
Exactly. So that it's not something that comes there de novo, but it's something that's there in limited form, and then it can maybe spread if other things change. And so one thing that people have argued is that humans are just less dominance hierarchy oriented than our close evolutionary relatives, that like the dominant ones are partly empowered by the masses, right? Like, in a democracy, that's obviously the most modern version, but that is also true to some extent in more traditional societies, maybe, where if the dominant individual is just too dominant that it just really hurts everyone, they will gang up against
That'll even happen in some, if you look at Robert Sapolsky's early work on baboons, that even happens in baboons.
Right.
So again, you have this de novo situation.
Yeah. And then so this is with that, so that you can see that these different components are maybe there, and then when foraging maybe depends much more on doing things cooperatively than just individual foraging, that then all the kind of ingredients kind of come together. But this is the thing, like with many things in evolution, or maybe all of them, all of these are kind of just prerequisites, and you can never say like this now must happen as like the next step. And very often it's like maybe it happened but just didn't survive, like that it just was not beneficial in the long term. But so you need a lot of stuff to come together for the kind of a new behavior or a new kind of social structure ever to really take hold.
And you need to understand what kind of selective forces were available to shape the critter in one way or the other. This is one of the things that I wonder a lot about. What is the evolutionary story likely to actually be? When you get into questions of cooperation, I think it's relatively easy to put together the story of how cooperation can be beneficial now, but the question is how it gets selected for. And you have these crazy battles. I talked with David Sloan Wilson at one point for one of these interviews. And we talked about the multi-level selection and group selection theories where you basically have bands of humans going to war with each other. And then I've talked to Sarah Blaffer-Hurdy, who says, there's no reason to think any of that. Because first of all, the archaeological record doesn't suggest much warfare in human evolution. And second of all, it's just not necessary that you have conflict to create an evolutionary adaptive advantage to cooperation. Do you have any thoughts about this?
I mean, one thing I'm really wondering about that relates to especially what Sarah Blaffer-Hurdy has been working on is the question, why young children would engage in these kinds of behavior. So one thing is like to explain why would humans do it at all, and why do we cooperate so much more than, I mean, nobody would question that we cooperate much more than in many more contexts, and we're much more dependent on that than our closest evolutionary relatives. But why young kids? Why would they have that capacity? And so there are different reasons why that may be the case. Like, one is that it's just something that kind of randomly pops up. Their kids are just smarter, and they just show it early on, even though it has really no effect. So it could have also emerged later in development.
Yeah.
So basically, whether this capacity to help emerges at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, it doesn't matter.
Right. Right.
Or it could be that you just need to get an early jump start to acquire the skills. So like kids babble and talk early on, but before they are really competent speakers, maybe it just takes many, many years, or until they become really good tool users. It also takes many years. So they just have to start practicing early in some sense. But again, the first
in other
time
words, helping is a form of play.
That's right, exactly. But the first time that it really has an impact is late in development.
Yeah.
But then a third possibility is that actually there's a reason for this to emerge early, because children make a difference. And so this is something you wouldn't observe in a modern society, where kids are not helping with whatever tax returns or something like that.
Yeah.
They're just not able to do that. But when you look at more traditional societies, you see that kids early on help in many different ways. And so this is what Sabrafa Hardy has pointed out, for example, that to raise a kid, it takes a village. You really need...
33 million calories or something to get them to 18 years old. And there's no way for a single parent to provision that kid.
That's right. A chimp mother can kind of do it. So there is this paradox that in comparison to chimpanzees, humans have a much shorter interbirth interval.
Right.
So we reproduce much more often, but it takes much longer for an individual to reach maturity and be self-sustaining.
Right.
So how is it
build
possible?
These crazy brains.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so how is that possible that these two things seem to be in conflict? So the argument by many people is that it's other people who are helping out. So this could be the reason why their grandmothers are still around, even though they're not reproducing.
That whole hypothesis.
Right. Or it could be that just generally like other relatives are helping, or that siblings are helping.
And so still you're having other people help the kid. What's the kid giving back?
But this is then the point that when you look at some work by Karen Kramer, who is a behavioral ecologist, who traced what are the energy contribution to the energy budget in traditional societies, you see that starting around 2-3 years of age, children are already kind of contributing a little bit.
Really?
So for example, the groups have to collect firewood or water at the well or somewhere and bring it there. And then that these young kids are already carrying a little bit of firewood and carrying a little bit of water. And that kids at 4 or 5 years of age may take care of the younger siblings and so forth. So,
do you have kids?
No, I don't.
Well, I got to tell you, my kids, 3 and 5 years old, starting when my oldest was probably 2.5 or 3, want to help all the time, and they want to do help in ways that's kind of a pain in the ass sometimes, because they want to like hover over the stove, participate in the cooking, and they want to set the table, and they want to do they just want to do this stuff. And it's getting to the point now where they're starting to do it a little bit.
Yes,
it's crazy. How about that? We're not even a hunter-gatherer society.
And they still, right. So exactly. So maybe you can take advantage of their helpful inclinations in your household. Yeah.
I just need to get more adults to provision my children, and I'll be better off.
Right. So what this opens up is the possibility that there is kind of, through some maybe kin mechanism, like that there is some benefit to helping out kin, that it is actually good for very young children to already have these helpful inclinations. I mean, it's not like when you look at what time do they produce more energy than they consume, that's not until adolescence.
Yeah.
But they're already contributing much, much earlier.
But the other thing, it does seem to be that helping and cooperating and stuff is what humans do. And so little kids are doing what humans do, and
Yeah,
their little
right.
kid to their little kid extent.
Yeah.
And they're going to grow up to be big kids and adults that do that a lot more.
Right,
I
right.
mean, even though, according to maybe Kramer and Blaffer-Hurdy and other people, no single adult can provision all of what a kid needs.
Yeah.
They're still working a lot.
Yeah,
adults,
right.
Adults put a lot of effort into this stuff.
Absolutely,
it's a
There's no question about
amount of work.
the ratio there, but
Yeah.
there's at least a little.
So you
bit.
got to ramp up. You got to prepare for it.
Yeah,
and-
that's
and
right.
Start early.
That's right. I mean, I think when I've laid out like the different reasons why this might happen, I mean, they're not actually mutually exclusive,
sure,
right?
sure.
So but it's maybe not just preparing oneself for the future, but that already young kids, maybe not like at 18 months, but like fairly
that's pretty
early
young.
are already gearing up to actually contribute at least whatever is within their means.
Wow, this is great stuff, man. And now you're at Harvard, right?
I am, yes.
Holy shit! How did
Yeah.
that happen?
Well,
You just
I mean, I
applied for the job,
Yes,
just
yeah.
like that. You just sent in your application.
Well, I mean, yes. Well, yeah. No, I mean, yeah, they had a
That's
job
great.
offer. And,
That's
yeah,
great.
I had it.
And things are going well in Boston. You like Boston? Okay.
I do, yeah. It's
Yeah,
a
it's a little
good,
cold,
it's a good,
but I guess it's a little cold in Leipzig too.
a bit more extreme at both ends, like a little hotter and more humid in the summer and colder and more snow in the winter.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's.
Yeah. And how
but
long have you been at Harvard now?
7 years, yeah.
Wow,
so,
that's great.
yeah.
Great. Tell you what, I could talk with you like this for hours.
Okay,
But
yeah.
Thank you
that
so
was
much
fun,
for
yeah.
chatting with me.
Thanks for having me.
great.
I think this is really interesting just because of how young the kids are. Like, I've seen plenty of kids be helpful, but 14 to 18 months are the kids in these videos.
Yeah, and one of the things about how young they are is that it suggests at least that they've had a relatively small amount of enculturation to sort of teach them
Right.
how to. That's sort of the point. One of the things that sort of cracks me up about it is how they get upset if they can't intervene and help.
Yeah. They're kind of like, okay, we've set up this situation where I'm helping you accomplish this task. And when he stops or they're stopped from helping him, they're a little impatient.
Yeah, they're totally impatient and hilariously eager too. I love the little smiles on their faces when they stack the little blue, whatever those things were, little blue plates.
Yeah.
Each time that kid in the video puts a plate on top of the stack that doofus, bumbling Felix has dropped, he gets this big smile on his face. It's clearly intrinsically joyful to join in with Felix and share Felix's goal, no matter what the goal is.
Right.
And that's incredibly profound when it comes to understanding the human animal.
We know every action an organism takes is to further its own survival, but like, what are the steps to get there? Like, what are the steps from a baby picking up a block that he drops on the floor and can't reach to like the passing on of that baby's genome?
Yeah. And, one of the things that's really interesting about that is that increasingly we're seeing a resurgence of something called multi-level selection or group-level selection. And that's still very controversial, and I don't want to, overstate this. But one thing that's interesting about trying to further your own survival is you can ask the question, well, whose survival? Mine, yours, or ours? And the group level selection suggests that one force is our survival, that the compulsion to cooperate is because we are the organism, not me or you.
Well, next episode, we'll be hearing from Sarah Kavanaugh. What can you tell us about her?
Sarah is a sort of psychological generalist. She's become really committed to how we teach psychology and how we teach in general.
Okay, sounds great.
Folks, the music of Circle of Willis is written and performed by Tom Stauffer and his band, The New Drakes. For more information on how to purchase their music, visit our website, circleofwillispodcast.com.
You can also find all of our old episodes on the website. If you haven't already, subscribe to Circle of Willis wherever you get your podcasts and follow us on Twitter and Instagram for more updates.
Circle of Willis, human stories of the science that shapes our world.